Are you dormant? Are you just going through the motions? Why are you stuck? Do you want to be healed and made well? All you can do is turn to Jesus, and immediately you will be healed. Stop following your flesh and follow your faith, and instantly your life will change. In today's sermon, we have our very young youth pastor, Courtnie Dowdy. She's amazing. She's energetic. She will make you want to come back and watch. So sit back and watch it from John chapter 5, 1 through 9. And it's all about a man coming to the well for 38 years. No one helped him until Jesus came by and helped him. Sit back and enjoy.
38 years. That's 13,870 days. He knew that number better than anyone in the world. How could he not? For 13,870 days, he waited and he watched. Waited for the rising sun to get into the sky and warm his tired and decaying bones. He watched it set, trying to prepare his mind for the cold, long night that he would have on his tattered mat. Once again, he spent 13,870 days trying to pass the time. Sometimes he'd try and count the number of stones that was in the wall in front of him, but each day his eyes fell weary. He was weary. He felt hopeless. He had spent 38 years seeing no possible end to his plight. This exhausted the depths of his soul. 38 years he waited and he watched. A new day meant more waiting and more watching. He'd watch and try. He'd watch as others tried to make it down into the pool. Once it was stirred in hopes for some healing and in hope for some relief. He has no idea where the rumor started, but he knew people believed it. Watching folks crawl to that pool day after day, it was clear that they'd try anything. They were desperate. He knew that feeling. He was desperate. He wondered if that water, surely cold, would refresh his body. He wondered how deep it actually was. How could people actually get into it and get out of it? He remembered someone telling him to give it a shot. And he wanted to, but as he looked at his weak and frail legs that hadn't been used in years, the discouragement set in. He knew he'd never make it down to that pool by himself. And the reality set in as he observed the discouraged faces around him. Laying near him, blind, lame, paralyzed, all here left to come and die. 38 years of waiting and wondering if this would be the day that he would say farewell to this cruel world. He tried forgetting what his family looked like because it was all too painful of a reminder of just how forgotten and alone that he felt. Surely they had forgotten him by now. All of the creation had turned their eyes away from him, away from everyone there. He didn't blame them. His own flesh and blood had, with absolutely no remorse, forgotten about his existence. They stopped visiting him some time ago. It must have been too hard, too difficult for them to witness that pain. 38 years of experiencing deep wounds of abandonment, 38 years of absolute rejection, 38 years of questions for the God that they said created him. Why was this his life? Was it always going to be this way? Lying on his old, dusty, tattered mat, he began to stare at that pool of water again, wanting to be angry, but really had no energy to sustain even that feeling. If God was good and cared, shouldn't he help me? If God was good, maybe I should pray, or is it too late for all of that? Should I give up? Questions upon questions began crowding his mind, and there seemed to be no answers in sight, so much so that he had hardly noticed that young Jewish man walk in. Stepped into that space, and he clearly didn't belong there. Why was he there? Who would he come to see? Surely not us broken people. No one ever comes to see us. He tried to make out the details of his face because there was no one he had seen like this man before. He had compassion in his face. He walked with so much authority, but you could tell that there was a gentle posture in spirit about him. It was also clear, and little did this man who was waiting for 38 years know that on this particular day, this young Jewish man stepped into this place, and he would notice him too. He would speak to him, affirming the value of his life. He knew the questions plaguing his soul, and instead of just answering them directly, this Jewish man would ask him a question that would genuinely change the trajectory of his life, a question that he might have heard before, but this time when this man who had been waiting for 38 years had answered, it would make his life more full than he ever dared dream possible. This is what Jesus is in the business of doing, making lives more full, which gives us the courage to not be shaken at the times. Just off pure observation, my wisdom of looking at things, it seems to me that everyone wants to live a full life. I'm talking everyone, spiritual, skeptical, religious, irreligious. We're longing for our lives to be full. If I asked you, I said, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how full are you looking for your life to be? You're probably not gonna say, just that 3 to 5, D for degree, that's what we're going for. No one says that. No one wants that. You're not gonna say, the 3, that's good enough for me. No, we want an 8 minimum, and even that sounds pretty low, right? But often we feel like it's impossible. A full, purposeful life, enjoyable, the way that God actually designed and created you to experience it, doesn't feel real, so we settle for that 5. Why? It seems that in pursuit of full lives, it often feels like something is off. Something is broken. It seems like things in us or around us are not actually the way that they were created to be. There's something wrong, and the questions start creeping in. Are we doing anything about it? Is God doing anything about this? I think questions are so important. They are critical for our lives. They're super useful. What I love about our world and about our God is Jesus knows how useful questions are, and that's the primary tactic he uses to teach us about himself, about ourselves, and about the world that we are existing in. If you look throughout Scripture, Jesus' primary method of teaching is asking questions. With each question, we learn something critical about the person of Jesus and how he desires to love creation. And I think that's an important thing for us to actually reckon with. Because the question today that he asked at the pool of Bethesda, this man, is a question that legitimately changed the life of him, but also us today as we are reading this story. In John 5, he asked the question, hey, do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed? So if you have access to a Bible, we're going to take a look at the first 9 verses in John chapter 5. I'll take a moment so that you actually have an opportunity to get your Bible out because I was already there. But John 5 says this: sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now, there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie: the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who has been there, an invalid, for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, do you want to get well? Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Verse 9, at once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. Jesus, who is not just a significant figure, he is preeminent. I think that distinction is very important. Jesus being significant, a big deal, that's a matter of fact. It's not an opinion. Like he literally starts and stops time with a birthday. No, he's preeminent. He is the universe's creator, sustainer. There's no one greater. He has the authority to make things happen. That's who Jesus is. He gets stuff done, and it's always very purposeful. He's traveling, and he's teaching. And as he's doing this, he's making the heart of God known as he is traveling from place to place, teaching people about things. And he's doing so by asking questions. I find that so fascinating. And so the folks that are watching, the people that are engaged in those conversations, and us right now, we're learning so many incredible things about the heart of God. God's heart in this story, he has a desire to make people's lives more full. Now, first 3 verses, John sets the scene for us. He says, hey, brokenness is a real thing. It's a real problem. And I want to give you this disclaimer. Like, he specifically says, hey, these folks that are laying around the pool, they're blind, lame, paralyzed. And then he lists off these physical disabilities, right? I want to be clear that if you or someone you know has a physical disability, I am not saying that they don't have the opportunity or access to living a full life. No, I think what's interesting is John is describing what they're doing. He says, hey, they're laying around and they seem hopeless. They don't feel like their situation is going to change. For them, it feels like, oh, well, I am my brokenness. I am my situation, and it doesn't seem like there's any hope to get outside of this. That's an important distinction for us to be making. This is like, hey, no one is coming around here to affirm my worth, my value. All I know is that I am my brokenness here. They believe they're powerless to change any circumstance at all. So they have zero hope. But Jesus came to give hope. He came to give life, and not just a mediocre life of, oh, we're just going to get you by. He said, no, I came so that you could have life to the full. John 10:10. That's the promise. It's easy to look at a picture like this and dismiss it and say, well, I think I know where you're going here, and I'm not that broken, so no big deal. Or you dismiss your brokenness like, it's too much. There's no way that Jesus can respond to it. But I want to remind us that we're looking at something, circumstances in our lives, postures, feelings, pain, that we feel powerless to change. I wonder if you can relate to any of these. Like, does every decision you make involve trying to ensure that anyone approves of you? There's this panel of judges in your life, whether that's your parents, your pastors, your teachers, people at the gym, and the people that are looking at your Instagram, and you just want to get some kind of approval from them, and you can't seem to escape that. I wonder, do you find yourself lying often, or maybe even telling a half-truth about your accomplishments or your failures so you can just curate and craft a perception of who you want others to believe you are? You've never, retaken a picture 5 times before posting on Instagram, right? Me neither. I wonder if you look in the mirror and tear down what you see because you cannot stand the sight of what you're seeing. Or you tear others down with gossip or slander because it distracts you from your own junk. I wonder, do you find yourself really bitter or angry or at someone or something, and it doesn't look like there's a possibility of the ever changing in this lifetime? Does anxiety or fear run your life? Do you find yourself playing with people's emotions so that you don't actually have to sort out your own emotions? Or are you someone who's constantly running back to that thing that you don't want to do? That guy, that girl, drinking too much, drugs, pornography, that addiction, that thing that you just can't actually let go of. The problem with all these things, it seems like, oh wow, all of it is controlling me, and I pretend that I can control some of these things, but the reality is, I can't escape any of these. I'm just scratching the surface here, but I'm just curious. Can you relate to any of this? Does that sound like a life where something might be broken? Does that sound like a heart that's longing to be noticed? Does that sound like a heart that desires not to be fixed, but rather healed or transformed? You see, our view of brokenness impacts our view of Jesus. If we think there's nothing wrong, we'll convince ourselves that we don't need him. And that's really dangerous. these challenges can become so normal that we're so used to pretending that it's not happening, that we are convincing ourselves that 4 to 5 life is actually a 9 to 10. For about 19 years of my life, I'm just going to be vulnerable with you, I convinced myself that I was not blind. I had like prescription for glasses, and I refused to wear them. I was in class, and it didn't matter where I sat. I couldn't see the whiteboard. My family plays baseball, softball. I played center field, and I don't know if you've seen a softball lately. It's pretty large, bright yellow. Couldn't see it. Couldn't see it. So I was convinced that I actually wasn't good at the sport because I couldn't see the ball. I remember walking on campus, and people would be waving at me like, oh, hey, and I just wouldn't see them until they were directly in my face. And then hey, yeah, are you mad at me? And I was like, oh, maybe there's a problem here to be addressed. I just assumed that it was normal to be able to barely see. And I just thought oh yeah, this might not ever change, and this is just what life is. I needed to be interrupted. I needed to register that there might have been a solution, but that had to come from outside of me. And as we read that text, if you look at verse 5 and 6, you see that Jesus interrupts this man. He interrupts this man's life and circumstances with a single question. Do you want to get well? Are you interested in healing? Jesus knew he had been there for a long time. It's interesting to me as I read this and I'm reminded our circumstances are not a surprise to Jesus. Our circumstances are not a surprise to Jesus. He's known since page 3 of the Bible of our condition, broken. Not in a condemning way, but a rather invitational way. He's like, hey, I know about this. He knew for 38 years that this man had a desire to be healed. 38 years. I'm curious, how long have you left things in your life broken? Maybe you have an iPhone in your pocket right now that has a ton of scratches and cracks on it. I wonder how long it's been that way. There's a solution to these things. How long have you been fighting brokenness and thinking that you had to fight it alone? Do you need to be interrupted in these moments? Maybe you have a desire to get rid of these challenges that are clearly in the way of living a full life, but you're fighting addiction, anxiety, perfectionism, sin habits, fill in the blank, alone. It's helpful to know that when Jesus asks if we want to be healed, he full well knows the fight that's been in front of you, and he sympathizes with you. Verse 7 through 9, the last couple of verses in this passage, Jesus offers healing. He doesn't just ask a question and say, okay, well, good luck with that. No. He looks at this man who laid at the pool of Bethesda for decades and says, you and I know that something is off and you feel powerless to change it. Jesus says, hey, I can fix that. Jesus says he can actually be free from that. If you take a look at those verses again, do you remember how this man responded? He gives an excuse. I just don't feel like I'm enough. I've tried. I'm hopeless at this point. I never have felt like I'm enough, really. Jesus doesn't ask the question so that this man would finally get the courage to heal himself. He doesn't ask that question for that reason. He asks so that he would accept the free gift and then walk in it as if he believed that the gift was for him. Be free. Get up, grab your mat, and walk. You are free from this. Invalid does not have to be his story. Doesn't have to be his identity. Addict, perfectionist, bitter, anxious, sinner doesn't have to be yours either. There's some power to change that situation. The old way of your life is no more on this side of the cross. We have an opportunity to walk in the newness of life. And that's amazing when you think about that. We get to live as if we believe that the cross has in fact set you free. You specifically, free. One single question. One single question has the capacity to change everything for you in the same way that it changed everything for this man who had been laying at the pool of Bethesda for 38 years. I think Jesus asks us this question every day. Do you want to get well? Do you want to be healed? He has the authority to ask because he can and he will actually heal us. Your brokenness, and get this, the world's brokenness. That's how much authority and power he has. That's why we can truly believe that we don't have to be shaken by the times. When Jesus heals, things are going to change. He guarantees it. That's the story Scripture tells time and time again. Jesus is in the business of healing because he loves creation. He loves you. The promise we read is very clear in John 10:10. I have come so that you may have life and have it to the full. John 19:30 shows us the follow-up when he says, it is finished. And so if Jesus said it is finished, you better believe that it actually is. If you're going to experience any healing in this life, it'll have everything to do with Jesus. Everything. And Jesus doesn't withhold himself or healing from us. I pray that as you identify those things that are holding you back from living a full life, that this reminder would be encouraging to you today. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks for watching. Be blessed by sharing this message. Support our ministry by following us on all social media platforms like YouTube. Hit the subscribe and like buttons, Pinterest, Facebook, and Instagram. Your generous giving allows the church to grow, which supports our efforts in providing the needed services for the community. There are a variety of ways for you to continue your giving. Go to the links in the description below, and God bless.